You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
This past May, the hosts of 5 major late-night talk shows had an idea: to meet every week and discuss the complexities behind the ongoing Hollywood strikes. What ensued was a series of hilarious and compelling conversations. Now, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, and John Oliver have teamed up with Spotify for an all-new limited series podcast, Strike Force 5, so fans can listen to these once private chats and answer the question, is there such thing as too many comedians on one podcast? Yes. Yes, there is, especially when 2 of those comedians are Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Fallon's ego. So, needless to say, that has nothing to do with what we're here to talk about, except that it does, because how many Wolverines is too many Wolverines? It's roughly the same amount of how many Jimmy Fallons is too many Jimmy Fallons. And how many Batmans is too many Batmans? I'll give you a hint. The number is somewhere less than the number of brain cells that John Oliver has. But DC wouldn't believe you if you told them that. This is How Many is Too Many, the Devil's Advocate's answer to, wait, there's another Spider-Man title? What's up?
Hey, how's it going, Kyle?
Not bad.
How's it going, chat?
Hello, the chat. Are any of you listening to the now incredibly awkward Strike Force 5?
I would never listen to Jimmy Fallon on purpose.
Well, I think he's going to get voted off of the striking talk show host island for being kind of awful. So
I should clarify that for a second. I liked Jimmy Fallon when he was on SNL.
Right. No, turns out maybe not such a great work environment. Workplace environment. So he might get voted off of Talk Show Podcast Island. But tonight's show is How Many is Too Many? And why Wolverine?
or Spider-Man or Batman. I mean, I went with Wolverine in the thumbnail because maybe he's not the best current example, but at one point in time, he was by far the best example of this. But it's altered through different characters at different times. And I think this is like one of those things that it's really... So the core idea of this, right, is how many titles should one character really be in? How many is too many? But the funny part is, it really kind of touches on this like notion of how much of a good thing is too much in a lot of different ways. So I think we're going to have kind of fun with this topic. Hopefully chat's excited about it. Remember, we will open the phone lines later, so keep your phone questions ready for anything you might want to call in and talk to us about with this topic. But yeah, so chat, while we're opening up on this topic, why don't we start off with you guys telling us what you think the most overused character or characters are in chat, and I would love to see that.
So I have a twofold answer. I think there's one group that's overused, and I think there's one character that's so dramatically overused, that character will never come back down from this. So the group is the X-Men.
X-Men, yep, 100%.
Marvel will throw the X-Men into things that have nothing to do with the X-Men to put the X-Men logo on the title or on the cover because they think it'll sell them more books. The character that is so dramatically overused, it will never be the same, is Superman. And here's what I mean.
That's a good one.
Superman may not be in as many titles at any given time as Wolverine or as at DC right now, Batman or Harley Quinn or any of them. But Superman is always the guy they call when the characters can't handle their own business, right? When the Flash can't handle his own business, it's Superman that comes to bail him out. When Batman can't handle his own business, it's the Superman. When Wonder Woman can't handle her business, it's look. There are other people who are perfectly good that aren't called Superman. Okay. Wonder Woman can call, like, I don't know, Aquaman. And well, Aquaman kind of sucks. He's better than nobody. And I think that's kind of where this starts for me, right? Is sometimes characters are overused in a good way. And when we talk about Wolverine, that's one of the examples I want to use. Some recent history with Wolverine, in my opinion. But there are other characters that are used just so the writers can be lazy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's for me, the one that really bothers me is the popularity factor of, well, Wolverine. This is where the Wolverine example really holds true to me. And I think it's a good one for Batman as well. Wolverine is so popular right now. We know he sells books. Okay, so the logic is then let's put him in as many titles as possible. Well, there's a point of diminishing returns where that's no longer going to matter. It's no longer going to be a successful strategy.
Right.
And also it touches on probably the most important part of this to me, which is Wolverine was really cool because he was that badass X-Man, kind of hanging out, doing the dirty work for the team, willing to get his hands dirty and all that stuff, right? Well, it was kind of interesting to start to see some of his solo adventures. And then it was a little less interesting to see him show up in other books and make guest appearances. And then it was a little less interesting to see him show up in Avengers. Like, you're kind of destroying the mystique of that character, not the character mystique, but the mystique of the allure of the character, right?
Right.
That's what gets interesting to me. Like, I think that's the crux of that overuse that really bothers me, because not only are you oversaturating the market now, you're also diluting the character.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think there's like I said, when we talked about there's good and bad, right? In terms of overuse. And how many titles is too many titles? Well, you can have characters that are in a ton of titles that don't get misused or overused. So one of them I wanted to talk about was TMNT. And I would agree to some extent that they are massively in too many titles sometimes. But one of the things that has happened for a lot of years is when a book has been underperforming or a character has been underperforming, they'll cross TMNT over with it, because then those readers will gravitate over. The Turtles crossing over with Sonic means Sonic is going to sell more books. It might save a Sonic story. Or the TMNT Batman crossover they did. Well, that brought a lot of people from one side to the other, whether it be Batman to TMNT or TMNT to Batman, and it introduced them to universes that otherwise people might not have known existed.
Right.
But then you have some of these characters like Batman showing up in really weird spots when, like, Green Arrow could have showed up. As long as it's not the terrible one that was in the TV show, I'm good with that. And then when you talk about diminishing, the Joker has been way overused. He used to come around infrequently and be terrifying from the anticipation. Now it's part of daily life. I think Michael is right, but I think there's a better example. And it's Venom and the Punisher.
Yeah.
I think those characters are characters that you would see once every few years, right? They'd get a miniseries over, they'd come around, they would cause chaos, and then they would leave. And you wouldn't see them for a while. Whereas the Joker has really, since his inception, been a 3 or 4 arc a year character in Batman. Even if they're only a couple of issue story arcs, they're around. They do a Batman story, and then they transition to a Condiment King story, then they transition to a Kite Master story, and then the Joker would show back up because he'd be part of the Legion of Doom or something in a big villain crossover book. So I think the Joker being overused has always been the case. But I think for years it was done correctly, and now it's getting to the point where it's, well, the Joker's popular. Let's just throw him in. You know who the Joker should fight? Wonder Girl. Let's just throw him in that book. No, it don't make no sense.
Right. When, you know, what you're talking about in my mind is a little bit of the Jaws or the Alien, not problem, but the way that they're used, right? It's the horror movie trope of less is more. And when you're talking about somebody like a Venom, that's a really good example. And that's part of what makes Venom a scary character. It's something that could pass on to a character like Null or Black Winter, some of these newer characters that once, you know, they're kind of dead right now, or Null's status is a little bit different than that, but they've recently been killed. And when they come back, what are the odds that like eventually they're going to be overused and then they're going to become an anti-hero or something? With cosmic threats in Marvel, it's a little less likely, but you get the idea, right? And that's kind of where you run into that problem. And anti-heroes can be a good thing, right? Like Venom crossing over to be an anti-hero. I know people have different feelings about that, but you know, some people truly love that, and that can be awesome. But it's part of that problem where it's like you to have cool heroes, you need good villains.
Right. That's certainly a problem. I mean, it happens in everything too. You see it in wrestling, right? Teams that are, or guys that are villains in wrestling get so popular they become, good guys. And you see it in sports. Teams that are historically villainous, like, the Patriots or whatever, for years were villains in the NFL, and now they're kind of nothing. Right? There are other villains. The idea of villains becoming good guys is a problem, but the idea of using villains so regularly that they become nothing is somehow worse.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Make
sure we're hitting the comments here a little bit. How about Kingpin? That's interesting.
I don't have an answer for Kingpin. I really don't, because I think Kingpin is one of those that wasn't used for a really long time. And he's been used a lot lately because he's been popular on TV. And that's another part of this conversation that I think we need to have, right? Like this idea of sometimes you're being marketed to, and you're not supposed to know you're being marketed to. When Iron Man starts to look like Robert Downey Jr. in the Iron Man books, it's because they want you to recognize him as the guy you saw in the movie you saw.
Yeah.
Right? They're marketing to you. They're not trying to appeal to you necessarily. They're marketing to you. Yep. And so that is something that in and of itself we have to remember when we talk about overuse. Is this an actual overuse of a character, or is this a misinterpretation of the use of this character because they're putting out a bunch of stuff to try to get us ready for a movie?
Yeah, think about this example as sort of the opposite that became the example that proves the rule. Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy were, I know there's fans out there. I'm not trying to insult you when I say there weren't Guardians of the Galaxy fans. There were some out there, of course. But let's be honest, they were never even a C-list team in people's imaginations. And, James Gunn comes out with this group of team, this team, the humor, everything that made them a family, all those different kind of elements that drew people to Guardians of the Galaxy. And then for a very long time in the comic books, Guardians of the Galaxy were doing everything. They were in every event. They were showing up. To some extent, that's still true. I think it's kind of trailed off a little bit, but it's that thing where it's like, okay, now, and then you see characters spinning off and doing their own series and all these different things that happen. And that can be good. It can be, but I think it's that thing where comic book publishers love to go nuts if they can. Give them an inch and they will give you a mile.
Right. And that leads me around to something somebody had said earlier, that the thumbnail should have been Vampirella and Red Sonja.
Yeah.
I think there's a level with some characters, and there are examples of a publisher has something that works and keeps going back to that well, even if doing that isn't necessarily what's best for those characters, because it's what's best for the company that fosters those characters. Does that you don't tell somebody not to publish a book that makes them money.
Right.
But at the same time, sometimes that's not good for the character. And you got to remember that with one comes the other. And so, like, I've had, and Sean has seen it, and everybody on the channel has seen it, my share of frustration about how many Red Sonja books are there, how many Vampirella books, and how am I supposed to keep them all straight?
And which one's a continuation of certain storylines, or which one's its standalone?
Right. Which one was is a follow up from the last miniseries, and which one is a new miniseries? Right. But they wouldn't publish them if they didn't make the company money. And that's an important kind of link in this chain, right? That a healthy company means we get more content one way or the other. And so if it means putting 900 Wolverine books out, then that's what it means. But that may not always be what's best for the characters. So
I actually want to share. I meant to, this kind of just reminded me of this, but I have this tweet that was shared earlier. Okay. I'm going to put this up here, and keep in mind, I'm not saying that it's necessarily something that I've vetted as being true. I have a feeling this is one shop sharing their poll numbers, most likely. Right. But I saw this tweet hanging around the comic conversation earlier, and I'll read it to you. It's from Pulp716 Coffee and Comics. About 58% of our X-Men subscribers have canceled their X-Book subscriptions in the past year. The majority of them have subscribed to X-Books for 10 plus years. In addition, Gods is our lowest ordered Marvel first issue in the past 5 years. And on the surface, you may not understand where I'm going with this, but think about the Hoxpox, that the House of X Powers of 10 Hickman initiative. To me, I hadn't read X-Men in a while, and that's where I jumped back on to reading monthly X-Men books, because, okay, you have this new creative direction coming in. Admittedly, I also assumed that there was probably some lead up to MCU lore building kind of stuff going on that I wanted to be on the ground floor for. But you have Jonathan Hickman coming in. He's launching, 2 series. That's all you need to read. And then even after those 2 series wrap up, you have a limited number, a handful, I think it was 6, I want to say, titles running that tell the X story. That's a manageable number for a very key component. It's what allows me to want to afford to buy every X comic every month, and for that narrative to be cohesive, to really feel like it's one story that needs, hey, we have a couple different X teams. We have Wolverine, that's sort of a manageable number. That makes sense to me. What, you need the X-Force element in X-Men that is operating in that clandestine style fashion and willing to break some laws and break some rules. You need the core X-Men team, of course, but at some point that has ballooned into this. I think it's like 25, 30 books that you would have to pull to read everything going on in X-Men. And not only that, that's before you get to line-wide crossovers or tie-in events that might happen, or characters appearing in other books. If you really want to be a completionist and read everything for those characters you love, that becomes an untenable number for a lot of people. And some people are like, hey, no, I love that. More is better. And I get that. That's cool. I'm all for that. But to Kyle's point, it makes money in the short term. But when you start seeing things like about 58% of our X-Men subscribers have canceled their X books, and these are people that were reading for 10 years, you are now, in my opinion of this sentiment, starting to see the attrition that's being caused from that brand being, spread a little too thin. I think that's certainly a factor.
I think that's part of it. But I think numbers are such a tricky thing in the comic book business.
Yes.
And this is something that we could have a show about, right? Like understanding numbers.
Yeah.
But the basics of it is what that store just did was tell you their reality.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the reality of the whole industry.
100%
For
anecdotal.
instance, if you go to my LCS, and I say my LCS, if you go to the LCS that is geographically closest to me, they would tell you that if it isn't published by Marvel, DC, or Image, they can't sell it. That the books don't sell. You go to another store like Miss Jen's store, and she'll tell you that's absolutely not true. The reality is that any of these stores, when they give you their numbers, are giving you their reality and not necessarily the reality of the business. The reality of the business doesn't get bared out until much later. It's the Netta saying ASM is the bestseller of September. That wouldn't shock me if it was true. And I know that you're sending it because one of the things that I frequently see from you is talking bad about the current Spider-Man run. But it wouldn't shock me if Spider-Man's the bestseller of September. September is generally a slow month for comics, and Spider-Man is generally one of those books that holds its subscription numbers very well. Much like Batman, much like Superman. These are characters that we're seeing in a ton of titles because their subscribers subscribe and then never leave. X-Men used to be that way, and then the X-Men stuff happened. House of X, Powers of X, and all the other million things that have followed it. And now all of a sudden, what Bronze is saying, I don't have the budget, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the wherewithal to read all 600 titles. So I'm going to cut back. So they said 58%. What did it say again, Bronze?
58% of our X-Men subscribers.
They didn't say 58% of our X-Men subscribers have canceled all X-Men. They didn't say 58% of our X-Men subscribers no longer read X-Men books. They've just canceled their subscriptions. They may be buying them off the shelf. They may have canceled. If you are getting every X-Men title, right, that comes out in a given month, we'll say that's 10. Well, 58% is basically canceling 4 books out of your 10. Basically. Well, there are 4 books that are ending and not coming back. So is that really cancellation or is that slough? Is 58% of our X-Men polls have canceled their X-Men books, their X-book subscriptions in the past year? How many have you picked up? There's data here that is missing that I would want as a former retailer and as a person who breaks down these numbers all the time to tell me what they're actually telling me. But I would guess that they're still selling more X-Men than they were selling when it was X-Men Blue and Gold. Even with this. So is it really a problem or is it just a symptom of a problem?
And to be clear, you mean the actual titles X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue from about, 10 years ago? Okay, just checking.
They were the big things that happened before Hickman took over.
Right.
That I remember.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to have this data, right? Because it would tell me more of the story about what's happening with the X-Men. I can tell you this, when the New 52 came out, my Batman numbers tripled. Because that book was so good. And Tom King was crushing it. Or not Tom King. Was Tom King? I don't even remember.
It was Snyder, wasn't it?
Yeah, Scott Snyder, sorry. Yeah, it was Scott Snyder. And then things kind of fell off as we went through Convergence. Right? Then when Batman Rebirth happens, my numbers from there doubled again. So I went from, say, 20 Batman subscribers to 40 Batman subscribers. And then that number kind of fell down to about 35, 34, somewhere in there, and then doubled again to 70. So even with the losses, I'm still way ahead, right? I would still be selling 10 more copies of Batman a month if I lost 50% than I was when this whole thing started. So it's important to know that's why you see so many of these titles, right? Because they work and people buy them.
Yeah.
That that reference just to me seems like it's a slough off number. It's a, hey, I don't have the budget to buy these books anymore, or these are books that are ending anyway, or hey, I'm getting 10 X-Men books a month. I need to only get 6 X-Men books a month.
And you are 100% right on the data side of this, and I take data pretty seriously for the most part on my channel and stuff. So I feel a strong agreement with you on that. But I as a talking point when we started talking about this, I was like, this just instantly reminded me of this tweet I saw, and I will actually, just to follow up, because it's just to not spend too much time on this. But there is one person who shared their X-Men pull list in response to that tweet. I just went back to the original tweet, and I thought this was an interesting list here. I think that might be a little easier for people to read. And this is just one person. Again, this is anecdotal evidence, but this was their X-Men pull list. Alpha Flight, which is a limited series, Children of the Vault, limited series, Dark X-Men, limited series, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, I think that's weapons, right? Vengeance Alpha, Immortal X-Men, Jean Grey, Magneto, Marauders, New Mutants, Lethal Legion, Realm of X, Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants, Uncanny Avengers, Wolverine, X-Force, X-Men, X-Men Days of Future Past, Doomsday, X-Men Legends, X-Men Red, X-Men Unforgiven.
Okay, so let's do some counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 titles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So just over 50% are limited series that
Correct.
end.
Which is correct.
So even if those just fall off, you're looking at what? 50 out of 21, 11 out of 21 is what, 56%?
55 or yeah,
right.
something like that.
Right on par.
Here on my
right on par with Pulp 716's numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the interesting part here, right? So I remember when I cut Batman from my pull list, I kept only Detective and Batman. I wasn't reading any of the other things that Batman was in. None of the Dark Knight stuff, none of this other things that were happening at this time. And because what I realized is that 60% of my books or more were books that were going to end. They were miniseries. They were just money grabs. They weren't anything that was going to be considered further continuity. And that to me was an indicator of I don't need to read this anymore. So if you tell somebody this is a 4 or 6 issue miniseries, now they might change. It might change the continuity. It might change canon. But do I really need to read it? And if it does change canon, can I buy it as a trade later? Right. So if I'm looking at that list,
yeah, you can make that argument for any story arc in an ongoing though.
But let me, if I'm looking at this list, so Alpha Flight 5 issues at $4.99, it's $25. That's an $18.99 trade.
Yeah.
Children of the Vault, 4 issues at $3.99, or yeah, it's $16. It's probably a 12 issue trade. The amount of money I'm saving just by doing it that way on these limited series is not insignificant. And that's the other thing that I think we're missing here with some of this when we talk about, people are walking away from these books, is that cost is not nothing. If I could just cutting those miniseries and buying them as a trade saves me $100. What else can I buy with that $100? Can I buy all my Spider-Mans? Right? I mean, How many books is too many books? The answer is when it's one more book than the average buying consumer will buy. Right?
Before we move on from that thought, I want to put one more. Again, this is not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
But how many comic book collectors do you imagine are buying more than one cover for each of those books, or at least for some of those books? That is where it gets real crazy, because let's say you're on X-Men and you really love that B or C cover as well. In addition, you're the A cover that was in your poll box, or I mean, you can play that game all day long. Whew, man,
right,
right.
I mean, that's what I'm saying is that just cutting 60% could save you real money. And in a time where you have the current financial whatever that we're going through, $100 a month isn't anything to sneeze at. And imagine if you're buying multiple covers, now you're talking $200 a month.
Yeah.
Or more.
And imagine if you aren't just an X-Men person and you also, like you're saying, you also buy all the Batman stuff, or you buy some of the Batman and some of the Spider-Man, or whatever, you're reading some Image titles. I doubt this person only reads X-Men. Maybe that's certainly possible, but you never know. That starts to get impressively large when you talk about the variant cover, which to me is a spin-off of this topic, and I don't want to go too far astray. But when I said the less is more topic, the idea of how much is too much, you do start to run into that same territory, because even if it's only 5 titles you're reading, but you collect 4 covers for each one, you're at 20 titles again.
Right, you're spending just as much money.
Yeah.
If not more, if your shop is selling you variants at cover.
Yeah, or you're not going after the incentives.
Right, if they're incentivized, or they're Marvel's old favorite meter exceed things and Marvel math, like these things that could cause these books to have to be charged more for. Like, in some parts of the world, we're talking about a mortgage payment. I mean, really.
Yeah.
So how many is, to go back to the original premise, and I keep wanting to pivot back to this because I could talk about these numbers all night. But to pivot back to that original premise, how many is too many? The answer is very nebulous. But the answer is very clear. Too many is one more than the market will hold. So if you're being told that 58% of the market is walking away from your books, you need to cut your total output by 58%. And then if you still are losing, then maybe you have a problem with story, you have a problem with writing, you have a problem with other things. But if that's what the numbers are telling you, that 58% of people are like, it's too much, then stop. It's, and it's a line I've talked about when we talked about variant covers, right? Dynamite wouldn't publish 190 million covers of a given book if they weren't selling. And so sometimes when we bring variants into the equation, we have to remember that might be the thing that's selling. Right? That might be the thing that's carrying the weight. And so when you talk about what the market will bear, when you talk about capitalism in this way, you have to remember that it comes in all different forms. Right? Sometimes it's, I'm selling 2 copies of every cover. Well, if I publish 8,000 covers and I sell 2 copies of all of them, that's enough to fund me making another book. Right? Especially with indie comics or, smaller press stuff.
Yeah.
So how much is too much really is, it's a market determination. And I think it changes character to character. Should we open the phone lines up? We've been at this 35 minutes.
Yeah, we definitely should. As you're doing that, I'm gonna pivot on that point a little bit, not pivot away from it, but just do that devil's advocate thing, because what you're talking about there, and it's very important. I'm not trying to say it's not, but you're talking about the quantitative element to what can be sustained. And I'm going to go back in time a little bit to a point I was raising earlier, to the qualitative element too, which is you brought up switching back to New 52 to Rebirth, how it brings on those new readers. And this is one of those things that I cannot give you the numbers, but I know that a certain percent of readers that are coming on board because of the simplicity of knowing that I am starting at the beginning of something new. And if you extrapolate upon that concept, go back to my House of X Powers of 10 example. A lot of readers were excited about the creator coming onto that book, but a lot of readers were also excited about the simplicity of what was being presented. And so there is this very common economics 101 concept of, is it better to sell X number of units at X cost or Y number of units at Y cost? Because you'll actually make more money by selling more units of fewer types of products, right? Or fewer items. And that is, again, it's nebulous because there's really not much I can say on the numbers when it comes to that. It's hard to really quantify that when it comes to the market as a whole without doing some polling. But another thing that we could potentially deduce from that is it less intimidating for more readers to jump on if they're looking at an X-Men lineup that has 3 or 4 titles versus 20? You can make up your own numbers to wherever you want them to be. And would that sustain more readers? Would it bring in more people that are willing to try it out and that wouldn't go, well, geez, there's no way I'm going to get caught up on that? I don't know the answer to that, but it does make me wonder, because when we come back to the original concept of the thumbnail, which is not necessarily all this topic is about, the how many titles is too many for one character, that idea of too many Wolverine books, it goes back to that discussion a little bit about, have you now diluted that character across 17 books to the point where what else is there to say about Wolverine this month that's going to interest a new reader, that's going to interest existing readers? How many life or death situations can Wolverine get in where he scraps himself out of it by using his healing factor, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So that becomes a core part of this issue to me too. It's not, it's both. It's both. That's the answer. It is definitely, the one more than the market will sustain, but it's what is influencing what the market will sustain as far as reader interest goes, and as far as quality goes.
And that's why you see so many number ones, right? Like a number 1 sells more than a number 2, sells more than a number 3, sells more than a number 4, generally.
Right.
And that's why everyone is so quick to do new miniseries or do short runs, or why Zenoscope, every book they do is a number 1. Right? Because when it says number 1, there are people who just buy all number 1s.
Yeah.
And you talk about market value in terms of quantitative, and it got me thinking about something, which is you said that you can make a lot more money selling a lot less of something than you can selling, and then there's a place where there's inequality, imbalance, and then there's another point of stabilization where you're selling so many of something, you can sell it so cheaply and make the same amount of money.
The volume makes up for
right.
Yeah.
It's an economic principle of equilibrium, right?
Yeah.
But so I looked it up, and the 2 most expensive cars in the world, retail cars in the world, are the Bugatti La Voiture Noire, which I can't even say, let alone afford, and the Rolls-Royce Boat Tail. What do both of those companies have in common?
Limited production numbers.
They don't make many. So, and that's what I thought was going to be the case. This is going to be one of these things with ridiculously low production numbers.
Right.
If the comics world were to adopt this and say, you know what, there's one Wolverine book, we're going to let it run until it ends. how long would it take for them to get from that number 1 sells more than a number 2 to the point where they're selling so many number 50s that it doesn't matter anymore, right? Because right now, if they do 6 and then they do 6 and then they do 6 and then they do 6 and there's a number 1 every 6 issues, that number peaks back up and then you're seeing this number.
Right.
But if you saw it, the bell curve come down, where is equilibrium? Where is your low point? And what happens after? Because if at your low point, you can get more readers to jump on, it will start to come back up.
Sean, to your point that you're making, which is that they also offer a driving experience that others don't. And that is in part because of this. It's still more of that equation, because you're talking about cars that I don't know for a fact on those 2 vehicles. I assume they're handmade, finely tuned machines that are using high-end performance parts. But that is part of what that small batch manufacturing process allows them to do. If they wanted to be Ford and sell more of their car than an F-150, there's no way in heck they could do that. And yet,
the Rolls-Royce boat tail is truly luxurious, with an amazing 2-tone exterior, stunning custom finishes inside, and a hosting suite where you can find a built-in sun umbrella and champagne fridge. So exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is something that is very, very one-off.
Right. And also, to be completely fair, designed to be something to appeal to rich jerks that will want to buy it as a status symbol. That is something that I don't know equates 1-to-1 to what we're talking about with this element of comics. But
there are people who want the number 1s because that's what's going to make them money later.
Right.
That's
well, sure, of course.
Jump in and they spec on. So there's the number of factors that contribute to why a book sells and why it doesn't, is a whole other kind of kit and caboodle, right? Like why a book sells and why it doesn't. Champagne fridge just running my car. I'm guessing that if you can afford this car at $28 million, someone else will drive so you can drink.
Oh yeah, no, this isn't. I'm not driving this thing around.
Right. By the way, the Bugatti is a steal by comparison at only 18.7 million.
Peasant car.
Right. 10 million difference between the top and the bottom. And as I scroll down, hey, here's the first one that's like not a Bugatti or a Rolls Royce, and it's a Mercedes Benz.
By the way, Sean, I feel you. I was using that as a talking point. So thanks for helping out with the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly it. Is if you're only writing one title, you can focus on it.
Exactly, and not only that, to go to the boutique handmade example. There is another couple examples to that analogy that do pay off. Let's say, and I'm not saying this is how it would work right now, but it's potentially how it could work. If you're not writing 10 titles for Wolverine and you're writing 1 or 2, could you afford to pay a higher caliber creative team to come in and write a story? Somebody who doesn't normally write comic books, somebody who that doesn't always work. I also understand that. But at certain times, it's been amazingly successful.
But could you get Grant Morrison to write Green Lantern again? If you were only doing one Green Lantern book and you were really focusing your Green Lantern efforts on it, right? Or could you get Jeff Loeb to come back and write some, or, whoever to come back and write these characters that we all, know and love? If instead of saying, well, you're one of 9 titles this character is in, and they all have to kind of talk to each other, you're it. Do what you need to do.
Yeah.
You got to sell 1 million copies, or you got to sell 50,000 copies.
I think that's a very salient point to this conversation. Not only does just the nature of having multiple titles for a character, or having that character appear into like JD is saying here, about Wolverine isn't at least too many crossover events, for example. Even if you're just talking about the number spread across titles, when you start to get to the how well can you focus on that character, and I don't just mean the quality of the writing itself or the quality of the art itself, which are both extremely important, but also more of that editorial narrative presence of having that character be focused, having it be somebody, that can evolve and go through a character arc. And that can happen in crossover events. It absolutely can. But what is more likely, in my opinion, is for that to be easier to accomplish if you contain that character to a smaller arena for them to play in, and where writer can kind of, be the puppeteer there with that character in a little bit more controlled fashion, rather than being like, well, I can't have Wolverine go to the Shi'ar Empire for this amazing intergalactic samurai story I want to tell, because he has to be on Earth for this stupid new Fantastic Four event that's going to happen, and they need him at the Baxter Building because his adamantium claws are going to tear open some MacGuffin. Great.
Well, and to that end, that's why I think House of X and Power of 10 were so good, is that it was Hickman was doing it all. He was overseeing it all. Like, he was writing it. He had the story arc. It wasn't, well, we need somebody else, otherwise we're going to miss our deadlines. It was Hickman, top to bottom. So I think that's important, right? One person doing all of that means that you get you get one cohesive idea. And I saw that. But I wanted to, we missed this. Frog Brawler, I had to buy Iron Man to read about what was going on with the X-Men. That's an indication that you're out here, as the kids say, doing too much. Right? When you can't even contain your story in the book of your story. Why?
Oh, here's another great example of that. Why is Miss Marvel dying in Spider-Man?
To get reintroduced with a different origin in her own book?
And
why was she in
X-Men?
Spider-Man anyway?
Yeah.
Right, so she can join the X-Men. But the question is, why?
It's the perfect example of this, though, because it's not only are you running that character through different books, you're telling their most important element of their narrative in a different book.
Right.
That's massive.
The Netta, I won't let you disparage Joe Quesada. He is a legend, even if you don't like that story. So that's where I'm gonna stand on that. But no, you're right. You're killing him in one story to bring him back in another, to put him on another team, when you could have put somebody else in Spider-Man. And if you wanted somebody to die, they still could have died. And Ms. Marvel could have kept her power and just been like, I got it as a mutation. Okay, great. Granted, it doesn't match what's happening in the Disney Plus show, but who cares? So
I think there's good ways to tell that story. And I will be fair. I read the current X-Men stuff because of some of the issues we talked about earlier. I read through Marvel Unlimited, which means I read behind what most people are going on. So I have not gotten to that part of the storyline yet. For all I know, I could read that and absolutely love it. I haven't personally read it. I don't want to come across as sounding like I'm disparaging the current storyline without reading it. But on surface level, it strikes me as a symptom of this problem we're talking about. Spreading that, what's the line from The Hobbit? I'm like too little butter spread across too much bread. I love that for this. It's perfect because some of these characters, you want to bite into that bread and get a nice juicy bite of butter. You don't want to have just a hint of butter on it.
Yeah, no, I don't know that reference, if I'm being honest.
Oh, okay. It's Bilbo says it when he's talking about fading.
Who's that?
Oh, are you not a person?
Which one is that from the second Lord of the Rings movie, which is the only one I've seen?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You've only seen the 2 stars, but you've never read the Lord of the Rings?
Nope.
Okay. Got it. Fair enough.
It was assigned reading in school, so I, in fact, didn't read it in protest for making me read it.
I got it. Now, unfortunately, that probably would have appeared, I believe, in the Fellowship of the Ring. So you get a pass on that one, sir.
Okay.
But it's still a great quote, even out of context.
I've also never seen or read a Harry Potter. So
That's fine.
Yeah.
I was late on that bandwagon, so I can appreciate that.
So to get back to the original premise, and
there's too many Harry Potter books.
How many is too many?
I mean, there's like what, 10 new ones now since they got.
Oh God, I have no idea. I don't know how many original ones there were.
Like 8 or something, I think.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't care. By that point, I had already read Preacher. Like, by the time Harry Potter came out, I'm like, I'm past that. I'm good. So, I was well into the finer works of Alan Moore by then. Cinema Purgatorio. But the thing for me that I keep breaking at with this topic is we have a problem as consumers of this media that needs to be sorted. And that problem is, how do we stop feeling taken advantage of with all of these titles? And how do we read the stories we want when they're being spread so thin, Bronze can make an obscure reference that I don't get?
The Fellowship of the Ring is an obscure reference.
Well, no, just as a reference. No, the nerd's biggest fear is to have their obscure reference gun jam, and yours didn't.
True. Yeah, it's the ammunition flows for days.
Right. So it's this idea, like, how do you read the stories you want to read if doing so means you've got to buy non-associated titles out of order in the middle of story
exactly
arcs? And then how can you, again, feel not taken advantage of when you decide you want to read everything that has to do with the story and they're making it 60 books? And I don't know what the answer is, but I think from a consumer standpoint, if I was a consumer, the second I started asking myself that question is the second I stopped buying.
Or at least considering canceling half of your polls for that particular title, series, or line.
Right. It's the second I stop buying and really go, okay, I'm just going to order the trades. But then, Sean, you get the problem of how many trades is it? Are they going to publish one big omnibus compendium size trade of all of Hickman's X-Men? Or am I going to have to buy 20 or 30 trades, some of which won't include books that I need because they're from other titles, but they'll be in those trades? So do I then have to buy those trades? It turns into this question.
That might be a topic for a future show there, Jay.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. But I think the answer for this topic is that they'd have to publish one.
Yeah.
And I don't think Marvel will with X-Men.
Ooh, I kind of love this comment. Now, I understand this goes back to the core of the issue that Kyle brought up, and it's a very valid point. Would those publishers be making X number of covers and all these things if it wasn't making them money? But it gets to that point where I do wonder about the long-term effect on the hobby and how that really can tie into this question. Because, look, readership is down. I mean, the number of we've talked about this before, the number of new readers coming into the hobby is just not what it was. And it's the number one thing that I care about is trying to get more readers involved so that 20, 30 years from now, when I'm old, I can sit around and tell young people about the comics knowledge and drop those those nerd references and have them be like cool instead of being like, what are you talking about, Grandpa?
Right.
So I mean, that's not just it's that might, if you don't know me, that might sound like I'm being serious. No, I am not being 100% serious when I say that, but I would love to know that these stories that we love and that have changed our lives and helped us with our mental health and inspired us and forced creativity and inspired movies and TV shows. I would love to know that these things will live on and be something that people care about 2 generations from now, other than just Spider-Man's cool.
Yeah,
I mean, that's great. Spider-Man is cool, but.
Right. So here you go. This is one of the biggest examples of this thing got out of hand. So we're going to try and give it to you in a way, but we're only going to give you what we want. And it's right. Civil War doesn't include Fantastic Four stuff or the Punisher stuff. A lot of the smaller volumes aren't included in the omnibus. So it's actually an incomplete story that now is your only way to get everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you can't contain it all in one book, what hindrance is that for your consumer? Why would I buy a Civil War omnibus if I'm not going to get the whole Civil War story?
Yeah.
I'm going to buy the Walking Dead 50-page omnibuses, but it's only going to be every 3rd issue. Doesn't make sense to me. So
all I know is you can't watch the movie and truly know Civil War. That's for sure.
It's true. So where do we come down on this? How much is too much, Bronze?
So for me, I'm going to answer it. This is to me that I have to look straight down the camera and I have to answer it in my own personal opinion. Normally, I try to speak for what I almost feel like is the least common denominator's point of view. I love that. Like, it's going to work for everybody in the hobby. It's going to work for the most people in the hobby without negatively impacting the most people. But for me, the only way to answer this question is from a personal perspective. And when it comes to a single character appearing, I will allow them in my world where I am the czar of comic book characters, which, is kind of my dream. I will allow them to appear in their own solo title, one, and I will allow them to appear in a team in a team or crossover, meetup, team up style book, or an event book.
Yeah,
for a character, that's where I'm at.
My answer is obviously one more than the market will hold is too many.
Sure.
But if we're going to put numbers on it, which I love that we're going to put numbers on it, I am going to be very close to what you're doing. And the number is 4. Because I don't mind Batman and Detective Comics.
Oof, I've always hated that. Okay, go ahead.
I don't mind it just because one has been around forever and the other one is just a more current version. Same way I don't mind Superman and Action Comics.
Oof, also, same thing.
It doesn't bother me. But if you're going to do that, one crossover or tie-in book. Right? If you're going to do one, then I'm willing to accept that you want to do multiple crossovers. So no more than 3. And what I mean by that is if you're doing Daredevil, but you're also going to do the Defenders and Daredevil's going to be in it, that's fine. And you're also going to do maybe an Elektra book and Daredevil's going to show up in that, that's fine. As long as these other books are truly standalones that feature that character. So for Batman, I'm good with Batman and Detective, but then he's in Justice League of America and that's it.
So here's where I have to, because I'm providing these physical reactions, I have to provide my opinion on that. Here's what, for Batman and Detective, and it's kind of the same thing for Superman and Action. For Batman and Detective, if they could stick to the idea that Batman is about Batman and Detective is about Batman and the Bat family, with different characters taking in,
right,
you know,
it's a universe book.
Right. I would be down with that because Batman is, when you're talking about Batman, Superman, and I'll give you Spider-Man. When you're talking about those characters, I think there's room there. However, I would also say I don't think there's room for that currently with Spider-Man. Spider-Man in the 90s, sure. Spider-Man in the 80s, sure. Spider-Man today, I'd kick Spider-Man down to one book. Focus on that, and that's it.
Yep.
And occasional appearances in a crossover because he's the face of Marvel. But
right, there are enough Spider-Men that you could still hit the whole market, right? Because there's Peter Parker and there's Ben Reilly and there's Miles Morales and there's, you know, there's enough spiders. You know, there's you know, what do they call her now? Ghost Spider.
Ghost Spider, Spider Woman, Spider Boy, Spider Mite.
There's enough.
Oh my gosh!
Like if there's a Spider Ham book, we're in. But only because I'm hungry and I think I'm going to have ham for dinner. Anyway, there's enough there that everyone can get covered, right? But focus on one main title guy. And I'm with you, but that's why I say I don't mind Detective and Batman, right? Because I think, like you, I agree that some of them should be universe books and some of them should be single character. But then Batman can also appear in the Justice League of America. And I'm good with that. Because, you know, everybody is a member of some organization. Like, you know, I'm a member of the, you know, Producers Guild of America. Like, you know, some people are Kiwanis or whatever. But, like, you know, you can be a member of a club and have your own life. And I'm fine with that. So my answer is 3 or 4, depending on the character.
Yeah. There. I mean, that's the thing is, you know, you're giving that example with Batman. I would give the example of Iron Man or Captain America being in the Avengers is perfectly acceptable. They don't have to be in the Avengers, but they damn well get to be in the Avengers if they are needed in that lineup.
Right. And I think that's important too, is not counting things against these characters that aren't realistic.
Yeah.
Right. Like, again, Spider-Man, if Spider-Man is fighting with the Fantastic Four because he's a member of the Fantastic Four, because we're doing a Future Foundation story, fine. But Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, that's it.
So Preston and the Nita have both made comments here. Preston's is so does I think he means Spider-Boy. Does Spider-Boy count against? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. He does say Superboy. Does Superboy count against Superman, or is he completely a separate character? And then the follow-up comment from the Nita 616 has so many spider people. Okay, both of those comments together, I would not tackle this next week. I wouldn't tackle this next month. We'd let some time to let things gel and get some new opinions on this. But I think talking about how many versions of a character is too many, or, you know, along those lines, does it dilute the idea of that character? Does it diminish the original character? I think there's an argument to be made for having a discussion about that, because both of your comments to me are in that ballpark.
We can sort of tackle this on Saturday on our special edition for Batman Day.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because how many Batmans are there? Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne, Damian Wayne, plus all of the not legally distinct from Batmans in terms of Nightwing and all of those guys.
Also 1940s Batman versus modern post-Dark Knight Batman.
Right. Absolutely. So
have we talked about that?
Huh?
Have we talked about that? I was just going to say.
We should probably announce that we will be doing a special edition of Devil's Advocates in which producer Kyle is super punchy. On Saturday here on The Experience as part of our 19-hour and 39-minute long live stream marathon. We are going to start at 7:20 a.m. and end at 3 a.m. Eastern for me, or start at 4:21 for Bronze and end at midnight his time.
I'll be ready for that show.
Celebrating Batman. And we're going to do Devil's Advocates after I've been on the air for something like 18 hours. So I will be super punchy, and we will be talking about how many Batmans are there on Batman Day here on The Experience. Stay tuned. Hit the subscribe button. Click the bell. Follow us on social media. Join our Discord. All of those things for announcements about what's happening.
We'll shoot up the bat signal. You just keep your eyes on the sky.
Hold on. Don't. Hold on. Boom, boom.
Oh. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I mean, there we go.
Just saying. So yeah, no, that's a thing we're doing this weekend. So be tuned for that. There's so much else happening. I can't even begin to tell you guys all the things that are happening. Like, we're gonna do one show that the guests are gonna be professional wrestlers. Like, it's gonna get out of hand. It's gonna be punchy. It's gonna be great. So make sure you tune in Saturday and watch all of our socials for that. I'm sure we'll put stuff on the Discord, the various Discords and other places to be having that conversation. So, for Bronze, I've been Kyle, Jay in the background. Thank you to everyone who's been here, everybody who participated. Is there anything we need to close out on, buddy?
No, I just think that as Kyle put it in the chat here, I will post this little reminder link is in the chat. We would love for you to go and suggest future topics for the show. You see us highlight some of your comments and instantly, spark on them as things that we would love to talk about in the future. Frankly, Kyle and I could talk about a lot of things all day long, but we would love to talk about what you want to listen to. So that's fantastic, and we do appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. We will see you all on Saturday for Batman Day.
Join the party. Head over to our Linktree to find all the links for everywhere The Experience is all the time.